Hi, this is Adrienne DeSutter. I am here with the Farm Family Resource Initiative, talking a little bit about how we understand farm kid chaos, helping farm kids through the tough stuff. I am a former school counselor and now a farm wife. We grow corn, beans, cows, and kids up in Illinois here, and I'm also the founder of Sow Hope, Grow Hope, which is an organization that I created just to have conversations like this, talking about mental health and the different challenges that we face in farming. You may have noticed throughout the past few years that the conversation in farm stress has really grown. We've started to talk about those stressors quite a bit in the media, in our conferences and organizations, but we haven't seen a lot of focus yet on the kids, on the rest of the family. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, yeah, the kids aren't really dealing with the finances or worrying about the weather or, running around, running the business. So farm stress maybe doesn't even affect them, or how can that really work? But I came across a really interesting statistic, really, that I think is a perfect introduction to why farm kids deal with some tough stuff on the farm. And the statistic is from the American Psychological Association. Um, and this graph here represents the statistic. So 2/3 of parents think their stress has little to no effect on their children. So somewhere around 66% of parents think when they're stressed out, when they're going through tough things, that doesn't really affect the way that their children function. But only 14% of teenagers reported feeling not bothered when a parent is stressed. So on the flip side, 86%, if I'm doing my math correctly, of teenagers reported that when their parents are stressed out, when they can see or feel or hear the stress going on in their with their parents, they feel that as well. They deal with some of that as well. Um, so this is kind of some important stuff. When we talk about stress, that is a challenge to mental health. Sometimes we think about mental health as just being depression, anxiety, talking about suicide and things like that. But mental health encompasses everything. It's all of us. It's all of the stresses that we deal with. And so it's important that we pay attention to the way that stress impacts kids too, because even super young kids up through high school age kids can deal with stress. And while not all that stress is bad, it does impact their academics, their feelings of self-worth, their attitude and their temperament. It even affects their physical health, and so much more. We know that mental health is really important to the way that we function as a whole. So it's an important thing to consider. And in extreme cases, when children are dealing with some mental health conditions like depression or anxiety, we actually know that suicide is unfortunately a leading cause of death for young people. In fact, it's the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 14. So it's a big deal, and it is something that we need to definitely consider. And in rural areas in particular, we see suicides happen more than twice as often, or around twice as often as in major cities. So when we're talking about farm kids, we're talking typically about rural areas, and we see those numbers increasing, unfortunately. Some stress is okay. We know that sometimes stress is what gets us out of bed in the morning, right? Gives us a little push, a little motivation. So that's okay. But we also need to do what we can to make sure that our littles are taken care of and are staying mentally fit. And just as we on any component of the farm, we make sure that safety is something we really hone in on with our kids. We need to make sure that we're considering their mental safety as well. So what is it that farm kids are even stressed about? Well, first of all, who are farm kids? I'm in for the sake of this presentation, we're talking about all of them. We're talking about kids that are young, even babies or toddlers, all the way up through the older kids. We're talking about kids who are maybe active on the farm doing chores. Maybe we're just talking about kids who live in a farm family and don't do a lot of extra farm work. All of farm children and farm families deal with some of the stressors that come from simply just being in a farm family. And some of those things are listed here. We have certainly a lack of routine. I know that's something in our home that young people, especially, or people with neurodivergent brains, like having ADHD or autism, really need structure and need routine in their days. So because of the lack of consistency in farm life, we see a struggle sometimes with kids, and that gives them some stress. Maybe kids are worried about, not getting enough sleep. Maybe they're worried about, dad's never home. I know in our home right now, we're going through a busy season. So our farmer oftentimes is out of the house before we wake up and doesn't get home till the kids are in bed, or are just going to bed. So that's something that my kids worry about sometimes. Maybe you've got a farm woman in your family who is never able to come to games or recitals or FFA shows or 4-H shows, or the different activities you're involved in. Maybe some of the older kids can recognize that finances are tight due to the farm, and are worrying, are we going to be able to afford that FFA jacket this year, or the bat that I need for baseball, or the money for the field trip, or whatnot. So there's all sorts of different things that farm kids are constantly wondering about, worrying about, and the way that those questions come up in their mind is a little bit different for every kid. My friend Josie Rodolphe, Dr. Josie Rodolphe of the University of Illinois, is a fabulous researcher, and she talks specifically on youth farm stress. And I love one of the things she said. She said that the conversations in a typical business that are held at the boardroom in farming are held at the kitchen table. So when mom and dad, or grandma and grandpa, or grandpa and uncle, or whoever are having discussions about the things going on the business on the farm, kids are oftentimes around. With other occupations, you don't see that as much. They don't necessarily know what's going on with the business, and with mom or dad or whoever, parents. They don't know what's going on in their life as much as the transparency that the farming brings. So that was really thought provoking to me, to realize, like, our kids are exposed to everything, every conversation, right from the beginning. And plans for the future is something that I think we take for granted sometimes. As I mentioned, I was a former school counselor. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a 16-year-old boy who came in one day. And we had a good relationship, but he was super bummed because his dad had just told him, there's no room for you here on the farm. Like, you're going to have to go out and do something different. And while that's completely acceptable in the farm family, this boy had not anticipated that. And so he had spent all of his life assuming that he had a job lined up. His dad hadn't necessarily communicated well enough what the plans were. So he was constantly doing chores. The kiddo was doing chores, was doing all sorts of things with the expectation that it was part of his farm that he was working toward. So it was really crushing for him that day, and for several days after, just to realize that his plans were really messed up. He hadn't taken academics as seriously as he thought he should, because he didn't think he would have to go to college, or that wasn't in his plan. So it really threw him off. So those are just some examples about the things that farm kids stress about. And you can think, when you hear those things, those aren't really important, right? Those are small things. But the thing is, even with young people, those things are the big things. Those things are the big deal, even though it doesn't feel like a big deal to you, because you've lived life, right? And you can look back on some of your stresses in your teen years or in your youth, and you hardly even remember them, right? Well, to them, they're living this. To them, these are big deals. And whether they matter or not, it's a big deal to them. It matters to them. And because of that, it feels big. And they feel that stress regardless of, the real importance down, in the grand scheme of things. And let's be honest, there's all things that all of us, even as adults, we differ in how we prioritize things and the way that we have perspectives about things. So, I know that at my house, I think that trying to run a clean home is important. Well, the kids don't think that at all. So it's all about perspective, and we all have those moments, either in relationships where we realize we think of something differently than someone else. That's the same here. That kids think of, and teenagers have different items on their agenda than we do as adults, and it's all about perspective. It's not a right or wrong, but they're showing the stress regardless. And how are they showing it? Because kids are a little bit different than adults, right? Well, the Michigan State University Extension offered several specific characteristics that you might see when it comes to children and how they show stress. So even though they're feeling stress, you may not see it the same way that if you were looking for the same way that an adult's showing stress. Because the thing is, little kids can't just say, my children can't say right now, I'm sad dad isn't around a lot. My daughter's 4. She can say that every once in a while, I miss dad, but she's kind of living that sometimes, where she feels sad and she feels like she misses him, but she doesn't always know how to articulate that. And so instead, that sometimes looks like a tantrum. That sometimes looks like she's blowing up because she's sad or she's angry about that. And she doesn't know how to articulate it, and she doesn't know what to do with those feelings. So we may see some emotional stress. We may see mood swings or acting out of character or throwing tantrums, right, from our young people. Our middle schoolers and high schoolers, a lot of times, just from understanding all the stress that's going on in the farm family, can get overwhelmed, right? And again, and they're not necessarily just going to say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, or know what to do with that. So sometimes we see substance use, like testing out alcohol or drugs. Unfortunately, we see anger, we see, discomfort. And so sometimes that looks like isolation, where instead of going out and hanging out with friends, now we're going to stay kind of cooped up. Physically, kids show stress with a nervous stomach, with headaches or muscle tension. I remember myself even being in elementary school and being really stressed out about a social situation with friends, and so I would constantly ask to go to the nurse's office. I didn't necessarily feel physical symptoms other than that nervous stomach, but that was just kind of my way. That illness was my way of just coping with what was going on at the time. So we see some emotional things, we see some physical things, we see some social things happening with our youth, and I think it's safe to say that some of that is similar to how adults work too, right? I know that I'm not the best at being able to articulate the way I'm thinking and feeling to my spouse or to my family around me. We all struggle with that. We have feelings, but we don't always know what to do with them. And so sometimes that comes out in a way that is necessarily inappropriate, or it's something that we just don't intend. And little people are the same, but it's really important that as adults, we realize that our littles can see us, whether it's as parents, grandparents, family, friends. Our littles are watching us, and they're learning how to cope with their feelings, their anger, their sadness, their disappointment, by watching us as adults. So what we do is really important as well. So let's expand on that. Let's talk about more ways that we can help our farm kids through those tough times. How can we deal with stress and overcoming that? Well, one tip is simply to communicate with empathy. Let's talk about empathy for a second. So when the pandemic was going on, we heard a lot about kids missing out, seniors and juniors missing out on prom, right? Or on different activities in high school. And again, we can think about that and think, okay, well, missing senior prom, I can hardly even remember moments of my senior prom. So is it really that big of a deal? Well, empathy isn't about thinking, how we're looking at something. Empathy is about kind of putting yourself in their shoes and thinking about what their perspective is, and acknowledging that their perspective it might be different than ours. Back when I was in school, if I would have missed my prom, that would have been a very big deal to me, and maybe it wouldn't for you, but maybe something else. Maybe it was an important show, or maybe it was an important sporting event. In high school, those things are big things. So we need to, first of all, have that empathy and not have conversations with our kids about how we need to brush that off because it's just not a big deal, but instead communicate with understanding that they're hurting. And it's okay to say that. I see that these things are big deal. This is a big deal to you. I understand that this makes you sad. This frustrates you. If I was you back when I was in school, it would have frustrated me too, or I could see how it would frustrate you. Those are just the words that we can use. But more importantly, when we're using empathy, a lot of what we need to just do is sit back and listen, close our mouth, right? Turn off the advice giving, focus more on just hearing, because sometimes what people need to do to relieve stress is just vent, is just get all of that bottled emotion up and put it into words. Um, so we're good people as adults to be able to listen to our littles as they need to express things. And communicating in particular is important on the farm because of the example I gave earlier. Don't leave them guessing. Our kids are smart kids. They can kind of figure out what's going on in the world, even at a very young age. If you're watching the news, even my kids, my oldest is almost 6, she picks up on things that are going on, just based on watching the news or listening, overhearing the news. So maybe your teens hear about low prices, for example. When they're hearing about that, then they start to wonder and worry, again, what's our finances going to look like? What are we going to be able to pay for or not pay for? If you're struggling with a family member on the farm, because we know that's one of the major farm stressors is just working with family. If you're having an argument or a heated discussion with a family member and your littles are around, they automatically are going to have feelings then about how that went on and whose fault was it, and are we going to see grandpa ever again at Christmas time? Right? Again, it seems something that maybe even isn't logical, but in their minds those are the things that they're seeing. So let's just be open with our kids about the things that are going on. If they see a heated discussion afterwards, we need to debrief, we need to talk about that with them a little bit. Maybe you want to explain more about how money is going, and we want to make sure that everything that we talk about is developmentally appropriate. And all that means is, I'm not going to go to my kindergartner and say, Everly, there's no room for you on the farm. Sorry, you're not going to be a farmer when you grow up. Because as a kindergartner, she doesn't even really know what that means. And for her, we don't want, that's a dream crushing thing. And at that stage of the game, that's not an appropriate time for her to have dreams kind of crushed. So we just have to be making sure that we're thinking about the age of our children and what we want to share and what we want to divulge. And if you're curious about what is appropriate, there's all sorts of resources online to understand kind of the developmental ages or stages that your kids are going through. But also just reaching out to a therapist can help you have, or even a mediator can help you have some type of conversations with your kids in an effective way. So other than communicating with empathy, kids a lot of times just need their basic needs met. Maybe your kids are older and helping out on the farm. Maybe it's a busy season, and so they're having some late nights or early mornings with chores. If they're losing sleep, that's a contributor to stress. Maybe it's that you, during those busy seasons, or even just with your work ethic being gone a lot, maybe your spouse is home by themselves, having to make sure that they're caring for the kids by themselves. And so maybe their nutritional needs aren't necessarily being met. There's a wide range of reasons why those basic needs like eating, sleeping, exercise, right, breathing, resting, all of those basics, when it's easy to see why those can fall short sometimes, especially during those busy seasons. And those things are so important. I mean, I can tell you again, even as adults, I notice that if I'm not eating right away in the morning, I turn into a grump. And maybe that's not you. Maybe you can go all day without eating, and that's great. But I know that that's something my husband and I both share, that if we don't get food, then we kind of turn a little frustrated. We're short, with each other and just with little things that shouldn't be a big deal that turn into a big deal. And it's interesting now that we have children that we can totally see that happening in our children as well. When we're a little bit late for lunch, you know it by the way that they act. So we need to do the best job we can at meeting those basic needs, especially eating and sleeping. because those are things that can really impact stress in our kiddos. And I have to tell you that you're not going to be perfect as a parent. The kids are not going to be perfect eaters, perfect sleepers. It's not something that we need to totally beat ourselves up on. It's okay to offer some grace with ourselves. But more than anything, just understanding that when they don't get a good meal or when they don't get good sleep, um, that might be the why behind some of the stress or some of the anger or irritability that we see that next morning or during the day. So just sometimes understanding why something is happening can give us a little patience and understanding of how we can kind of just be more patient with the kids in general. A third suggestion: let's make sure that we're reminding our youth that they are not the problem. Okay, a lot of times kids are far enough removed from situations that are happening within the family, that they don't understand what their role really is. They don't understand what role they play in, why the arguments are going on, or why the isolation is going on. Especially again at a young age, we have a 6-year-old right now who notices that dad may not make it to her recital this week, and so that's really sad for her. I need to make sure that she knows it's not anything she's doing wrong. It's not that he doesn't want to be there or he doesn't like her or something like that. We just need to make sure that they understand kind of what the dynamics are on the farm and the why behind it. We need to make sure that kids understand that they're loved. And I know that sounds kind of silly because we probably say it all the time. But as an adult, again, hearing I love you is great, but how are we showing it to them in a way that is meaningful to them? I can say I love you every night to my kids. And sure, that's a good start. But sometimes I even have conversations with my tiny kids about how they know mom loves them. And they say things like, when you give me a hug, or when you let us do something silly or something fun. They know dad loves them because dad is the silly one, and that makes them laugh. So just having a conversation about that has allowed us to really emphasize those things that are important to them. And that helps them understand how loved they are, and that, the things that are going on in our home are never their fault. But they can be part of the solution. This is so interesting. I think I never had thought about this, but a gentleman out of the Iowa State University Extension, I think his name is Larry Tranell. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but I read a suggestion by him. And he said, farm kids can be part of the solution, whether it's at home, helping with extra chores at home or on the farm. Maybe it's talking through, where we're going to prioritize our money. Just having conversations and including them in those conversations and decision making can give them a little bit of accountability and can give them a little bit of control. And I think we all need control. We all really strive to have control, especially when things seem like they're out of control. That's what we seem to have some weight off of our shoulders when we can gain some control in a wild environment. But I think if you're going to do that, I think we do need to remember that if an extra chore doesn't get done, for example, or that thing that they're helping, that job that they're helping with doesn't get done, we need to make sure they understand that they're children and they're still, again, not part of the problem. Them not feeding the cows one day, we don't want to blame them and put more weight on them and more stress on them for making a mistake when they're already feeling that heavy stress of the farm. So it's okay to say, hey, what are the consequences of the farms? Maybe now we're going to have to go early in the morning to get those cows fed, or maybe the cows, whatever solution you come up with, it's okay to express consequences. It's okay to say people make mistakes, but we need to make sure that we're being careful about the weight that they're carrying with any part of those chores and consequences. So finally, the last suggestion I have today to help those farm kids through tough times, offer resources and know that resources are available. On the screen, you'll see the number for the Farm Family Resource Initiative helpline. It's again, a wonderful helpline that can help answer basic questions or connect you with a farm counselor that you can speak with free of charge. that can help you again with some of those tough conversations, or just helping provide your kiddos with healthy ways to cope with stress too. You can also talk to a counselor at school or even a counselor in your area to help with that, even if they don't understand farming necessarily. With some good open information sharing, if you kind of give them the scoop on how everything works, they should be able to help mediate again, the the stresses that are going on and help you understand how to cope with them a little bit better. But I think one of the most important things when it comes to resources is just the idea that we're not going to talk at our kids and tell them what they need and what they need to do and what they need to try. Do you like being told what to do? Because I know I don't. And I can tell you that, especially in the heat of the moment, I don't want anyone telling me, you need to go see a therapist or you need to do this. That's not helpful. However, in calm times, when we have conversations with our children, not talking at them, but talking with them about things that they can be doing, and resources they could be reaching out to, or we can reach out to as a family. That again allows them to be part of that solution and gets them a little more accountable for the outcomes of what you're doing. So maybe that just means, let's talk together about a place where something an activity that you can feel good in. When you're dealing with stress, sometimes that isolation is hard, and sometimes we just need a feeling of belonging. So maybe that's in 4-H, maybe that's in a theater club or something at school, maybe it's sports, maybe it's church. But help your kiddos find one area or one person even that they can feel that sense of belonging and support. And don't be offended if it's not you, because sometimes as parents we have to understand that our relationship is a different one. It's a unique one. So helping them find again those things that really will allow them to feel good about themselves can take the weight off the shoulders of some of that farm stress. So I'm going to wrap things up today by just reminding you that the number one way that kids will learn to deal with stress is by watching you. So we have to do a really good job of just modeling good coping skills. And maybe that takes some research on our part, and maybe that takes some work on our part. Because I know multiple times a week I catch myself encouraging my kids to take control of their feelings when we're going through kind of a tantrum phase. And then I notice my own voice starts to raise and my own, stomach gets angry and I get kind of blood boiling feeling, right? And so even though I'm preaching, keep control of your feelings, mine are kind of going all over the place. So I have to model. That's something I'm working on now is, I'm teaching my young kids, all right, I need to cool down now. So I'm going to walk over here for a second, take a couple of breaths, just take a break from this conversation for a minute. And I'll be right back, to help you, through what you're dealing with too, when I can be a better person to help you with it, to help you through it. So it's important to just model that. But we also need to acknowledge that, of course, we're far from perfect. None of us as parents, none of us as grandparents, as family members, none of us are perfect, and your kids aren't either. So we need to just recognize that, especially during these busy farm seasons, that we are going to survive when we can acknowledge that grace is the most important thing. Just that forgiveness, that self-awareness that we're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And we're just going to make sure our kids know that too. So thank you so much for having this conversation today and for doing what you can to alleviate some of that stress that your farm kids are going through. I hope you'll utilize some of these tips and acknowledge that life isn't perfect, kids aren't perfect, and we aren't either, but we can certainly do our best to thrive out there. Thank you.